If you've recently got a square journal and are looking for ideas, or if you're thinking about getting one but you're not too sure if the layouts would really work for you, then we're going to look at 50 layout ideas for square journals. The square journal that I'm using is from Archer & Olive, which is one of pretty much the only places that seems to sell them. There are a couple different options, I've linked them in the description box, but the Archer & Olive journals are definitely my favorite. One of the things that really intimidated me about using the square journal was that additional width. I'd been so used to using an A5 that having that extra space was really quite daunting, but it's all good. I'm going to show you a bunch of different layouts. Opening it up though and getting straight into it, our first idea is on the inside cover here, and that's to include a little flip out. I love including flip outs to put in information like the key, or maybe key dates, references for the amount of space you have in your journal, both horizontally and vertically, or you can put in things like color codes, or if you wanted to, even flip out an entire annual calendar, which I have done previously. But flipping that one back in, and then turning into our first page. Rather than use the first page in this journal as a full page, I trimmed it down and turned it into a pocket. I've just decorated it with some tape here, and I've used the same tape on all of the pages just to make it look a little bit decorative. But the nice part about having a pocket like this in your journal is that you can store pieces of flat ephemera or page cutoffs if you're making Dutch doors. If you have a grid spacing guide or maybe some reflection cards, anything like that can be stored up the front here for really easy access. On the other side of this layout though, we have a grid spacing guide. So this is one that's actually in the journal rather than separate like this guy here is. But effectively it's just showing you different ways that you can divide up your page. We have the numbers going across and down to show that we have 37 dot grid boxes in both directions, you know, with it being a square and all. But then I've also got the divisions for the halfway marks and also the thirds in both directions. It really depends on what kind of divisions you prefer to use. These are the ones that I commonly use, but put on any of the ones that you want. Flipping over though, and our next idea is a year at a glance, and with that extra page width, we can actually get more than a year on here. The first 3 rows have our entire calendar year, and then the bottom row here has an extra 4 months, which can be particularly helpful if you need to plan quite far in advance, but you could of course leave that off and fill this with decoration, or make your calendars a little bit bigger if you wanted to. I've done the year at a glance so it just fits onto one page, but if you made the calendars a fairly decent bit bigger, you could make this a full spread and then just have the 12 months on there. This layout here is a Calendex, and it specifically relies on page numbering your journal to use. Effectively what you do here is, rather than writing in the events that you have going on, you put in a page number as a reference that you can turn to and find details about that event. We have a separate video on the Calendex, also linked in the description box, but this is just one style of future log. So if we flip on over, we have another style here. This one in particular is a horizontal style. So we have 4 rows per page, one for each of the months, with a mini calendar to show which day falls on which day of the week, and then a larger box to write in things that you want to write down. I've also put a very faint divider line in the middle of each of these boxes so that you could write 2 columns of text. And as you can see, this one offers space for 8 months rather than a full 12 months. I find that most of my journals of this size only last me 6 months though, so I'd really only use it up to here and then have an extra 2 months to write things in, which is fine for me. But if you were wanting to do a full 12 months, you could of course have another page dedicated to that future log, and then maybe a page for the year at a glance. Flipping over to another style of future log though, this one has the full 12 months, so omitting those mini calendars and just having a space to list out anything going on in each of those months. This one's nice and simple, you just write in the header for each of the months and then have some space underneath it to write. You don't have to put every second line highlighted, I just really enjoy having it there. And of course the way that I've set these up, they are just ideas. Do tweak them and change them to fit your own needs. After this one though, another style of future log you can have is using the Alistair method. So in this one, we have a column for each of the months of the year, which are just indicated by an initial, and then a column on the side here, which is larger, where you can write down what the events are. To use it though, you write down the event underneath the happening column, and then underneath whichever month it happens in, you write down the day number. So if something was happening on the 12th of January, we'd write down whatever was happening, and then underneath the first J, write the number 12. I also like to include a little dot here in its own column so that I can check them off as I move them into my monthly logs. But the next idea we have is a year in pixels. Now, typically speaking, a year in pixels is usually set up so that you only have one column of dot grid boxes per month, but because we do have that additional width in the square journal, you can use 2 columns or even 3 comfortably. In this one though, we have a column for each of the months of the year and a row for each of the days up to 31. You can see that the bottom of this one doesn't always finish at 31 though, so for the months that have less days, they go in a little bit. For instance, like 29 or 28 for February, depending on the year. And this also offers you a space for a key, maybe some stats if you want to track how many times something happens. And you don't have to use this one for moods, it's usually used for moods, but you can also use it for things like habits, routines, any challenges you're doing. One year I used mine as like a spending tracker to see how much I spent on any given day. There are a lot of fun ways that you can effectively use this to kind of gamify elements of your life. Flipping over though, our next idea is another kind of style of future log, but this one's different because it's kind of more of a calendar view. In this one, each of the rows represents a week of the year, and then each of the columns is a day of the week. And then you can just put a number in that box to represent what day number it is for the year or what day it is in any given month. So for instance, this one goes from 1 to 31 and then starts at 1 again. So kind of representing like January, then February, March, so on and so forth. This is the style in particular that I've been using for my future log recently. After this one though, our next idea is a bingo board. In particular, this one's really good for if you want to do a 25 challenge or a 24 challenge and just block out that middle box. So for instance, that could be 25 things before 2025 or 24 in 2024. Of course, depends on the year, but this layout is also really good for things like a self-care bingo or a physical health bingo, mental health bingo, effectively just another way to gamify things that you want to bring more of into your life. For instance, you could set one of these up for a trip that you're doing with a bunch of little things that you want to do while you're away on your trip, and then as they happen, just color in the boxes and see how many of them you can check off. Onto our next layout idea though, this one again uses the Alistair method, but this one is set up as a when did I last list. In the tasks column, you list out the things that you want to keep track of, and then depending on when they happened, you write down the number for the day underneath the relevant month. This one's really good for those tasks that happen fairly infrequently, but you want to keep track of when they happened to make sure it hasn't been too long since you last did it. Flipping on over, and the next layout idea we have is a Kanban board. Now I've set this one up on one page, moving from top to bottom, but you could use a full spread if you wanted to, if you have more than just 3 stages, or if the post-it notes or sticky notes you're using are fairly large, you need to make more space for them. But the general idea here is that you write down all of the things you need to do on little sticky notes, putting them in that top section, and then as you start doing them, they move into the next section, titled Doing, and then once they're finished, you move them into the bottom section. It just gives you a really nice visual representation of the progress that you're making in any project that you're working on. One of the things that really intimidated me about the square journal was the extra width on the page. The vertical distance is fairly similar to an A5, which is what I'd usually use, but the extra horizontal space, I wasn't really too sure what I was going to do with it. One of the fun things that we can do with this though is making waterfall tabs, or really they're Dutch doors, but most people call them waterfall tabs. Effectively what we do here though is we take a grouping of pages and then subsequently cut off less and less from them. So you can see this first one has the most cut off, then the next one has a little bit less cut off, the next one has a little bit less again. This is another topic that we have a separate video on the channel about, but it can be a really fun way to add some decoration to your layout and also eliminate some of that width that might be a little bit intimidating. Then by cutting down the pages, you can also change up how you make your layouts based on the new amount of space you've given yourself. Flipping over though, our next idea here is just having themed lists. This is especially good to have on the back of your smallest waterfall Dutch door if you're putting those in. So just giving it a title that tells you what the theme is, and then writing out all of your items. Another layout that we can include is a year in weeks. So this is just giving yourself a space to write down something for each week of the year. This could be for highlights, key tasks, or projects that you were working on. If you're working on some kind of a challenge, it could be a prompt list for that. I've just written down a number for each of the weeks of the year and then have a column to write down what the item is or task or whatnot. But you could also put this in more as a checklist so that as those weeks come and you do whatever it is on your list, you can just check them off. Over the page though, our next idea is weekly trackers. Now based on the vertical and horizontal distance of the pages, if you're going to do a full year, you are going to have to kind of truncate it or split it into two at least. So I've got a column for 1 to 26 and then from 27 to 52. Obviously if I was actually using this as a proper tracker, I would have the same style on both of these sections, but I wanted to show you a couple of options. So the first one here is a scale-based tracker. So either at the top or maybe at the bottom, you'd write out a scale to represent what each of these dots actually means. Maybe it was like pages read in the week or steps done or whatever it is you want to track. And then on the other side, this one is based on having separate individual things that you want to keep track of. So you put a check in the box for the thing that does happen and maybe a dot in the box for the one that doesn't. Effectively like weekly routines that you're trying to build. Another layout idea we have is a top 10. So this one is splitting your page vertically in 2 and then horizontally into 5. This one can be fun for ranking things within a particular category. So maybe it's like your top 10 color palette options, top 10 brush pens, top 10 movies that you watched in the year. Or of course you can take this style of layout and use it for something completely different. Maybe these are each of your different life areas and you want to write down a goal in each of them. As we go through these layout ideas, think about the structure of the layout and how you might be able to use it for different things. Of course, for instance, we had this one as a Kanban board, but maybe you want to make this a themed list section where you have 3 different themes that you want to write stuff about. Maybe instead of having this one as a year in weeks, you just want to have this one as some kind of a list of stuff that you need to get done in one week in particular. But you like the layout style, so you set it up in the same way. All of these ideas are very much just ideas. But for this one here, this one is what we call an XX in 20XX. So 24 in 2024, 25 in 2025. This one really is just a lot of fun, but for the way that we've set it up, you try and find 24 things that you want to do 24 times in the year of 2024. Now, if you're going to do something like this, it always pays to pick things that are quite small and very easily achievable, and that's going to look different for you than it does for other people. For instance, for some people, writing down read 24 books is very unachievable, whereas for others, writing down read 24 books is very achievable. So pick and choose ones that are going to be suitable for you, but effectively we just list out what the things are along the bottom, and then the little box above this effectively acts as a graph. So as we do the things, we can just put a dot in the box to say that that thing has been completed however many times. What I usually like to combine this with is a list of what those things are. So for instance, on our tracker we have movies watched, books read, and TV shows started, so I want to put in lists that actually describe what those things are. Of course, we have 1 to 12 here, but we also want to write down 13 to 24, so putting those in. If you're enjoying the idea so far though, make sure that you're subscribed to the channel because I share videos like this all the time. In particular, we have videos for travelers size journals and for A6 journals on the channel already. Of course, those ones are linked in the description too. Flipping over though, and after this one, our next idea is a routine builder. So depending on how many weeks you want this to go across, you write out those week numbers along the top, and then on the opposite side of this, you write down all of the tasks that you're trying to build routines for. What you could do is separate these out in terms of frequency, so maybe the ones that are most frequent at the top and then least frequent at the bottom. So for instance, this top section is all for weekly tasks, then the next one is for fortnightly or bi-weekly, and then as you do them in any given week, you can just check them off. And of course, it's good to have some kind of a key to refer to so that when you come back to this tracker, you know what you meant by a check versus a dot. Our next idea is a kind of dashboard page. So I've just split the page in half both horizontally and vertically, and we have 4 sections that we can then title with different things. So I've just picked home, work, personal, and learning, but really depends on what you want to write lists for. I've used this style previously for things like monthly dashboards, where I want to separate out my checklists into categories so it's a little bit easier to keep track of what needs to be done within each life area. After this one though, the next thing we have is a monthly tracker. So this one has the months of the year and then the things that we're trying to track. This one also has a space at the top for a key so that I can record what each of these icons actually represents. But what you could do is just put in a label that runs up the page from this. Or of course, this is a square journal. You could just twist this completely, have the months running along the top, and then those habits or routines down the side. As you complete any of these items though, you just check them off for the relevant month and then keep track of your progress across the year. I got to this point and I realized I hadn't included a future log that was a full year on just one page, so I put that in here. You can see that the general structure of this one is kind of similar to what we had at the start in terms of the year at a glance, but rather than having the mini calendars, we just have some lines that you can write in, and I've also expanded it a little bit so we only have a full year, not 16 months. And then in the little extra space that we have at the bottom here, I just decorated that with some tape from the washi tape shop, which made all of the decoration in this setup much easier. Now we're getting into some monthly logs here. So this style of monthly log really takes advantage of that extra space that we have. Each of these columns is a little bit wider than you'd typically have in an A5, meaning we can have 4 columns of days on the left and then 3 on the right. This extra space could be used for tasks like we have here, or it could be notes, you could put in a tracker, a gratitude log, really anything that you want to. I've of course gone and put in some decoration, but if you take that out, you have even more space to play with. This is a really great layout if you've got maybe slightly bigger handwriting, or the stuff that you write in typically takes up a little bit of extra horizontal space. It really offers a lot of flexibility in terms of the amount of space that you can write in. But another style of monthly log we have has a little bit of a narrower box for each of these. So you can see we have 5 days on this side and only 2 on this side. But in doing that, we've really opened up a lot more space for other stuff. So we've got a habit tracker on this one and also a note space. Of course, with the habit tracker, we want to have a little key as well so that we know what those symbols mean when we come back to this layout in future. And it still offers a little bit of space for decoration, which I always prefer in my layouts. I'm much more likely to use my layouts if they look nice. After this one though, we have another 2 monthly log styles. So rather than being across a full spread, each of these have their own page. This one is based on the more traditional monthly log that has the vertical list of numbers, but I also wanted to have a mini calendar on here because I always prefer to have a calendar view, and the nice part about having that extra horizontal space means that we can put that in quite easily. On this one though, we have 2 separate spaces, so we've got this panel down the side which has a to-do list for the month and then the mini calendar. And then we also have the event space here, which offers plenty of horizontal room to write whatever you need to. What you could do is also tack on a habit tracker to this. So just putting a couple columns down the side here to indicate the different habits that you want to keep track of. And maybe swap out some of this decoration at the bottom to put in a key for that habit tracker. Onto the next layout though. This one is based on splitting the page into halves. So half 1, half 2. And then on this side, we include a mini calendar. And then underneath that, we just have days of the month. Now the spacing on this one is a little bit off. I would probably have to tweak it if I actually wanted to use it. So I'd probably want to move this calendar up slightly and then have an extra number on this column here at the very least. But I think that the general layout of having 2 dot grid rows for each of the days of the month across those 2 halves could work really well to have a comfortable amount of writing space. Especially again if you do have larger handwriting. Square journals are really good for that. After this one though, we have another style of monthly log, but this one condenses it to a full calendar view on just 1 page. So the style of this one is quite similar to the future log option we had before, but instead of doing it for a full 14-week span, we're just doing it for 1 month in particular. This one in particular is a good style of layout for any of those months that goes across 6 weeks. So you can see row 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Or if the month only spanned 5 weeks, you can just make each of these rows a little bit taller with the additional space that you'd save. Having a look at another style of monthly log, which is only 1 page, this one again is based on that vertical style. So we have an event space here, and then separate sections down the side and along the bottom to write in whatever else you want to. I've labeled these ones as thoughts, goals, reflection, notes, and next month, but you can change any of these up for anything else you want to keep track of. For instance, this space at the bottom could again be used for some kind of a habit tracker, because there's enough space along the bottom here to fit in the number of days for any of the months of the year. On to the next one. This layout is effectively like an everything tracker. So initially I just wanted to set up a productivity tracker in the journal, so you can see that section down the bottom here where we have each of these boxes for each of the days of the month that you can then fill in with little symbols or maybe a color code to indicate what you were doing in the day that was productive. This is again another idea that we have a video on the channel for. But then after putting that in, I had a lot of extra space around the outside. And this is another one of those nice things about the square journal. You can really bring a lot onto one layout. So in this one, I added in a space for goals, a space for notes, and then also some mini trackers down the side. as well as having the decorative panels. This effectively would be like a one-stop shop for all of your trackers for the month, which I think is really cool. You could of course opt to not have this Dutch door and just put your key along the top section of the page if you wanted to, but I always find Dutch doors to be a lot of fun, so I enjoy including them. Flipping over though, and the next layout we have is a schedule. This one is again based on writing down the days for the month along the side here, but then each of these columns represents things that you're scheduling in different categories. So the categories I have are home, work, social, family, and goals. And then depending on what you've got going on, whether they be events or tasks or whatever else, you just write them in the relevant row for the day of the month. The next layout idea though we have is a habits and routines layout, and this one is based on having a mini calendar for the month for each of the individual routines or habits that you're keeping track of. If you remove the decoration from this one and condense the calendars a little bit, you could track up to 20 things on here, but without the decorative elements I could very comfortably track 16 in this style that I've used here. Up next, the layout idea we have here is a weekly dashboard. So this one can effectively be thought of as a one-page weekly, but the nice part about the extra horizontal space that we have means that it doesn't really feel cramped at all. In this one we've again split the page in half, so we have a task list on the side here which has the Alistair method, and then we have spaces for each of the days of the week on the side, which could be used for events or specific happenings, appointments, whatever else. And of course you don't have to split this one specifically in half, you can move that line slightly to the left or right depending on which of these sections needs more area. If you wanted to reclaim a little bit of real estate in the task list in particular, then rather than doing the Alistair method, you could just use a regular task list. It just goes to show that for any of the layouts that I've shown you, there are a lot of ways that you could change it up to make it your own. The weekly on the right hand side though is based on the idea of taking the page and splitting it into thirds both horizontally and vertically. But because there are only 7 days of the week, 2 of those boxes I've filled with decoration. You could fill them with trackers or a space for notes or whatever else, but I thought the flowers were pretty, so I thought I'd put those in instead. Another way that you can change this up is just by using different colors, different decoration, different lettering styles. There are a lot of things that we can do to a layout to change it up and make it suit our style. Onto the next style of weekly. This one splits the page into 8, so we have a box for each of the days of the week and then a space for notes. And even though this sizing is a little bit more snug than I typically use in my journal nowadays, this is the size that I used to use by default when I was first starting out my bullet journaling. I now find that having just 4 centimeters of space for each of my boxes feels a little bit too tight for me, but I know it must work for some people because it worked for past Jess just fine. Another style of one-page weekly you can do though is where we only have 6 boxes for the days of the week, so maybe the weekend shares, or maybe there's a particular day of the week you just don't want to record stuff for because you're taking an intentional break. And then at the bottom of the page we have spaces for those themed checklists, so home, work, other, whichever categories you want to use. So far the weekly layouts we've been looking at, or weekly dashboards, have just been focused on one page, but if you need a little bit more space, you can of course expand this out to a full spread. This one has plenty of space to write. I've of course gone and taken each of the daily boxes and actually split them into 2 so that you can have a time ladder, so you can kind of schedule out when things are happening in the day, and then a space for a task list. But you could just leave these open like we have in the notes section if you need to write things that maybe are a bit wider, if your handwriting's a bit bigger, if you don't really have much need for a time ladder. Of course, within each of these daily boxes, there's a lot of flexibility in terms of how you structure them. You can just keep them very open, you can make them a little bit more structured, but the square journal offers plenty of space to play around with, which is really good. After this one though, the next layout idea we have is a meal log. So this one is based on having a column for breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snacks. And if I was doing this in an A5 journal, typically it would span a full spread, where I'd have 2 columns on each of the pages. Because there is that additional width in the square journal though, you don't really need to. So this one just has each of those columns and then the number 1 through 31 running down the side of the page. This one in particular is a tape from Oopsie-Daisy, which has the numbers line up exactly with the dot grids. Very handy. That one's also linked in the description box. But our next idea is one that you may have seen square journals be used for quite a lot, and that's as a reading journal. The square journal offers plenty of space to print out and stick in your book covers and write a detailed review of how you found the book. We have 2 square reading journal flip-throughs on the channel, which offer some great inspiration if that's how you want to use your square journal. But if you want even more space to do an even more detailed review, then you can print off your cover a little bit smaller, maybe make a side panel panel for your rating, and then have plenty of space to write down all of your thoughts. When I do my reading journal, I like to have less space because this is a little bit overwhelming for me. I don't really like to write all that much. But if you're looking to do very thorough, very detailed reviews of your thoughts and feelings, then this offers ample amounts of space. The layouts that we have here are daily log ideas. So this one is based on the idea of having a timeline, or effectively a time ladder that you can tie specific events and tasks to. Whereas this one takes the log and splits it into a couple different sections. So at the top you'd have like priorities or events or affirmations for the day. You have a task list section and then a space at the bottom to do maybe some reflecting or writing down the highlights, anything you're grateful for, and then possibly even a meal log at the bottom. The third daily log though has a running task list that you can then specify what priority those tasks are by using HML for like high, medium or low priority. And of course you can include a picture of the day because you've got plenty of space, why not? The nice part about these ideas is that you can take them and put them into that weekly log that we had before, because the spaces that you have for each of the daily boxes are quite big. In terms of the daily logs that I typically use though, I normally just write out a header for the day and then write out as much as I need to, which sometimes is a lot, sometimes isn't as much. And then once I've finished my list, I just write out the header for the next day and keep going. I find that having it in 3 columns like we have here offers me ample space to write for the day. But flipping over to our next idea, this one is a projects list where you write down all of the projects along the side and then use the Alistair method to indicate the different stages of that project. As you complete individual stages for any of the projects, you just check off in the relevant box. I use this style a lot for my video planning, and I used it heaps when I was a teacher for like lesson planning and topic planning. But effectively, if you have any project in your life that has a similar set of steps to do for each of the individual projects, then this layout can be really useful. A layout that I like to put in pretty much any of my new journals is a new journal planning space. This is effectively a layout that I can just come back to, jot down some notes as I go through, so that when it comes to planning my new journal, I have all of these ready to reflect on and plan the best journal I can. I like to split it into sections of things that I liked and that worked, things that I didn't like or didn't work, any of my needs for the next journal, and any general ideas that I have. I also like to have a space to draw out some little thumbnails of what the pages will look like. Of course, these ones are sized for a more typical journal, like an A5, maybe a B5, but if you were going to do a square journal, make sure that you size them appropriately so that your thumbnails actually make sense. Flipping over though, our next idea is another weekly log, but rather than splitting the layout into 4 sections per page, I've split it into 6. So you can see days 1 through 6, and then the 7th day over here, whereas the rest of the space is just combined into a task list. This is a really nice simple weekly, but it offers huge amounts of space to write, which is really cool. If you find yourself to be a very busy person, or like we said, if your handwriting's a little bigger, this style of layout can be really nice. It doesn't have any lines to put in as well, just these highlights that you have for each of the days and then for the to-do list, but you could easily leave those out as well, and it makes for a really quick and easy setup. That's also a little bit pretty with the tape. But flipping over, another style of weekly layout you can have, which utilizes the full spread, is this one where we have the middle section for the days, so just spacing it out if you want to space it out ahead of time, or just putting in the header, writing in the list for the day, and then once the day is over, putting in the next header. But then the spaces on the side can be used for things like notes, tasks, trackers. Really, the possibilities are pretty much endless when it comes to filling those in. This layout is for anybody who really prefers to have a lot of horizontal space to write. So each of the pages is split into 4 rows. So we have Monday through Thursday, and then Friday through Sunday, with a notes or maybe tasks section at the bottom here. You could just make these lines go the full way across to the edges of the page, but I wanted to include some more decoration. This again offers ample writing space, especially in that horizontal alignment, which means if you have quite long things that you want to write, whether that be long form journaling or just tasks that have a lot of detail, then this type of layout could work really well for that. Over the page though, the next idea we have is a quarterly review. This one again relies on splitting the page horizontally and vertically in half, but because you have 4 sections, you can just label one for each of the quarters of the year. This can be really fun for like a reading journal statistics page, or if you have quarterly memories that you want to record, quarterly favorites. Of course, they don't have to be for quarters, they can be for life areas, but again, the square journal offers us heaps of space to write in. While the rest of the ideas that we had in this video were very much layout ideas, I also wanted to include a page of just ideas for what you could use the journal for. Now, technically speaking, you can use any notebook for any purpose you want, but if you didn't want to use your square journal for just an everyday bullet journal, then we do have plenty of other ideas for what you could use it for. But if you wanted even more square journal inspiration, then the playlist here is the next one to check out. That one has all of my square journal setups with even more ideas, so click or tap on that one and I'll see you over there.